We are back. What's going on, everyone? It's the Joe Holka Show presented by Line Movement. You want to know something that makes me really happy? The chat has been flying for like 20 minutes. We have people here just hanging out, talking football, waiting for the show to start. Guys, that is amazing. That actually makes me super happy. So everyone that came here early, maybe we'll start the stream early for those people here and there, just randomly. You guys won't even know it. Like randomly, if you're here early, I might just come hang out with you guys. I think that might be a cool thing to do. Good stuff, guys. Week 4. This is an awesome slate overall for a lot of reasons. I think that in the beginning of the week, we're walking through this, and it's like, wow, there's some high total games here. Like there's a lot to like about some of these games overall. And then obviously everything that's happening with games getting canceled. Last night we have a little bit of scare with New Orleans. Looks like we're still going to get that game. Thankfully, that would have thrown a true wrench in this slate. But we'll get to some news in a second, guys. I promised that I would shout out the notification fam first. But before we do that, if anyone's over here watching on Twitch, come hang out with us on YouTube. Of course, that's where the majority of the conversation is happening. Again, we got about 20 people here hanging out on Periscope over on Twitter. Join us on YouTube, guys. It's not hard to find us. So that's where the majority of the conversation is now happening, even before the live streams, guys. So that's amazing. Of course, we'll be here for the next hour and a half or so. And directly after this, we'll be on the Line Movement YouTube channel to walk through everything over there. Peter Overzet, we do have a special guest on that show also, so I'm not going to completely give that away yet, but should be a lot of fun over on the Live Movement show directly after this. But notification fam. So yes, if anyone is here for the first time, would love it if you would consider subscribing if you think you've gotten some value out of today's show as we progress through here. If you toss a like on it, what that really does is just if literally anyone is on YouTube just searching fantasy football stuff this morning, which is a lot of people, maybe we get suggested to them because we have such a great community and an active chat. So that like really does help a lot. Just kind of give Google those positive vibes, right? So that's what we're doing here. Notification fam. So those are the people that, for you guys that have been around from the streams last year that were significantly, just I guess exclusively, I should say, on Twitch, you get something to your phone automatically that says, hey, Joe Holka is going live. Now YouTube, you actually have to hit that bell to get that. So I appreciate my notification fam. DP in the chat, Chris Hinshaw, Alphason, The Flash, DP again, Armando, Bryce, Vincent says he doesn't need a notification because it's already in his routine. I love that, man. Josh McVie, Late Night Darren, Wig, Robert, Ryan, Greg. We got a bunch of people in the notification fam that were here early, so I love that. Steven in the chat says, hey, Joe, thanks for all the info as always. Hey, man, Steven, thanks just for being here, man. We talk about all these things, the like, the subscriptions, all that stuff. Honestly, like, just more than enough you guys are here on a Sunday morning. These shows are a lot of fun. And this is a great slate to kind of walk through all the thoughts, obviously kind of going through my head last night. If we were going to lose another game, looks like we're all good there. No positive tests outside of a fullback for New Orleans. So that's good. Looks like Ian Rappaport said that game is good to go. Thank God, because I wasn't really sure what was going to happen to the slate if we didn't have my boy Alvin Kamara, which we'll get to. We'll walk through a lot of things, guys. We're going to walk through each position. We're going to go through the data sheet, and then we're going to talk a little bit about some stacks that I really like, but also just I'm going to try and get to as many questions as I can today for sure. Craig, thank you for your subscription, man. Really appreciate that. I'll try and make sure I keep up with those along the way. Things get crazy on Sunday mornings. Juan says Holka doesn't have donut on his face. He's game day ready. Yeah, hey. Anyone that was here, was it week 1 or week 2? And honestly, chat, I'm never going to let you guys live that one down. I understand it. I did half a live stream on a Sunday morning in front of like 500 people. I donut on my face. Cool. I get it. I'll wear that. That's totally fine. But you know what? You guys didn't even tell me. I tried to literally just brush it off like it was no big deal. And I considered not even mentioning it. But at that point, like if you got donut on your face for literally half of a live stream, you got to just wear it. That's fine. I'm not perfect. You guys know that by now. Cybergenetics with the super chat. $5, man. Really appreciate you, man. Who's the diamond pick today? Cyber, at me in the chat. Are you talking DFS? Are you talking betting? Are you talking redraft? We do a lot of stuff here, man. So with that $5 super chat, I want to make sure I answer your question completely. Appreciate you for sure. So So guys, let's get to some news first. I think that since this is a slate where a lot of things, a lot of moving parts, we do have time, right? So let's sit here and kind of go through a few things that have kind of come out this morning. It does look like a couple of these Cowboys guys on the defensive end will be playing. Their left tackle as well, Treikwan Smith, is expected to play against the Browns, so that's really positive. I think it gives a small boost to Zeke, but we already like Zeke this week quite a bit. I think he's one of those guys that just has one of the largest floors overall each and every week. So we'll get to Zeke. We'll get to these other running backs, of course. On the Detroit Lions side of things, looks like Desmond Trufant is expected to play. He's got that hamstring injury he's been working through. Also, Christian Kirk battling through that injury of his ankle. He is expected to play in week 4. So we'll see. I guess the bigger news here is probably that DeAndre Hopkins is also set to play with that ankle injury. So both of these guys, I think that probably if you were going to kind of dig really deep with a guy like Andy Isabella, it's going to limit his snaps, his volume a little bit. So we'll see. It's nice to see that Christian Kirk and DeAndre Hopkins will both be available for Kyler Murray today. So I like that quite a bit. We'll get to that. Looks like Chris Carson is also expected to play. Big game, that's for sure. This Dolphins and Seattle game, we're going to spend a ton of time on that today, for sure. But we will get there. Kareem Hunt expected to play. Also, that Cowboys game I think is really interesting. There's a ton of stuff here in terms of obviously what's happening with the Patriots. Yeah, that's tough. No Cam Newton. I really liked this game overall, so it is kind of a bummer, but we'll get through that. Obviously, no Tennessee game either. What else we got here? Alvin Kamara returned a negative COVID test. We talked about all of that stuff. So it looks like we've mostly got through this. Terry McLaurin expected to play. It looked like that was something that was pretty expected overall. Joe Mixon has that chest injury. He will be playing also. Not a ton of things here that were super surprising so far. But we'll see. It is early, right? So let's see if I got anything else here from Cyber. I want to make sure I get to his question here. DFS, who is our diamond pick? I might steal that diamond pick. That's legit, man. It's got to be Alvin Kamara, right? Alvin Kamara, in my opinion, is probably $1,500 too cheap on DraftKings, and that's probably the easy way out. But I wouldn't be doing you guys a service if I wasn't saying that. I'm going to have a hard time personally not having Alvin Kamara on 100% of my teams today. As you guys know, I'm typically playing a lot of the smaller field, kind of mid to high stakes stuff at 1,500, or there's been some weeks where I've played like 5 to 6 teams in the Wildcat. So still kind of working through that. I kind of have been adapting a little bit. I used to just play the 1,500 every single week, one lineup. Now it kind of depends on how roster construction goes. I kind of mix things up a little bit. But I do like try and play some of the smaller fields because I think that is what's most important. We're going to make some mistakes along the way. I would love to make a few mistakes, still have some teams that do really well, but it's hard to do that when you're trying to beat 200,000 people. So there's that. If there's a diamond play of the week, Cyber, you probably don't need me to tell you that it's Alvin Kamara, but that's the one I'm on, man. Appreciate you. Let's see. What else we got here in the chat? Chat is flying, guys. A lot of Hopkins talk. Love that. Game 3 in the chat. He says, let's start the party. Always, man. Always appreciate you being here. Gaskin in particular is a great GPP play. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the game environment stuff here because I always like to at least start with that because I'm really big on game environment, guys. And what I mean by game environment is I really want to focus on games that, number one, are going to be giving us a ton of plays overall. So games that are up-tempo, up in pace, but also want to focus on games that at the line of scrimmage are really positive. So I think that one thing that we always want to talk about is that, yes, volume is great, especially for positions like running back, obviously targets at wide receiver, that sort of thing. But efficient offenses is really important because that's where the points are coming from, guys. So I think that overall, I'm really focused on the one thing that can really limit efficiency, and that's pressure. So really, poor offensive line, sure, you can still get there, all of those things. But like if you're just looking at some of these teams that are going to be seeing a ton of pressure, I think it's something that really matters personally. So that's kind of where I always like to start. So some of the games that I really like for pace today, we talked a little bit about Hopkins and this Arizona game. We've been talking about Arizona, what feels like almost every week. But I do really like the spot against Carolina. There's some very key pieces on the Carolina side of the ball that seem drastically underpriced to me. We talked about Kamara being about $1,500 too cheap. I've come around on Mike Davis, guys. I mean, guy caught 8 balls last week, so he's someone that, yes, do I think he's Christian McCaffrey? Absolutely not. But he has, like, again, I'll always tell you when I think I was wrong. I ended up with a few shares of him over the last couple of weeks, but I was not nearly as bullish as this guy as I should have. He came in and really just, I mean, you can't call him Christian McCaffrey light. I was about to say that. That's just tough. But a guy that is at this price point, I think you definitely have to consider him at 5,700 in this up-tempo game against Arizona. DJ Moore on the Carolina side I love as well, which we'll get to. So I think some of the ones at least I'm kind of worried about. Terry McLaurin, a lot of people were talking about him. I'm worried about this Washington offensive line holding up against this Ravens D-line. I think that the Ravens D-line is the real deal. I also think that the Ravens could make a statement here in this one. So I'm not so much on Terry McLaurin. We'll talk a little bit about Logan Thomas also in a little bit. The Giants offensive line, not that there's a ton of options, I think, for the Giants this week overall for fantasy. But I do like the Rams in terms of some defensive plays, which we'll get to. I think one of the other ones that I think is super interesting is the Bears against the Colts. The Colts are a team that's just been bringing a ton of pressure. That front, I think, is still underrated. So I'm on that. Bucks defense against the Chargers. I don't love that game for plays overall, but I'm not really heavy on Chargers at the moment on some of the builds that I've done so far. So that's kind of what I'm working through. Some of the other games that I really like, I love this Minnesota and Houston game. And I know that's not a super contrarian take at this point because everyone's been talking about Deshaun Watson. If you just came over from one of those videos over on Twitter, Deshaun Watson's been a big time discussion point this entire week. So I think that he's super interesting. I think that the Minnesota side of it is also really interesting. We talk a little bit about Adam Thielen, about Dalvin Cook, but what about Jefferson? I think that one thing that I'm trying to get a little bit better about is not waiting for people to adapt to something new, right? So if Justin Jefferson, I'm not saying he's an alpha or anything like that, but I think he might be too cheap, honestly. So I think that's interesting. On the other side of this game, everyone wants to talk about Will Fuller, but I mean, he was removed from the Texans injury report. So let's make that very clear. That was a couple of days ago. So he practiced in full on Friday. He's going to be ready for the game today. I think that this is a game that just keeps going up. Like the over-under on blitzbet.eu just keeps going up every time I look at it. So could be a shootout. Love the Fuller stack. We talked about that in the stacks video. So again, if you're here for the first time, would love it if you toss a like on this video. We're almost already at 100 likes. We're like 15 minutes in the show. So I appreciate you guys. Consider subscribing. You'll see all my videos throughout the week. We're live each and every Monday and Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. But also, again, right now, 9:30 a.m. on Sundays. These are the best. So we talked about a couple stacks in one of the videos. We talked about a Watson stack, a Fitzpatrick stack. Everyone wants to talk about Fitzpatrick. So let's do this, guys. Now that we got the majority of the people here that we're waiting for, we've kind of done a little bit of news and notes, that sort of thing. We're going to walk through quarterback. But before we do, let's do a quick poll in the chat. So at the quarterback position, guys, here's what I want you to do. And we're going to talk about the best plays on DraftKings, and we're taking into consideration price. So put a 1 in the chat if you're on Deshaun Watson. Put a 2 in the chat if you're on Ryan Fitzpatrick. Put a 3 in the chat if you're on Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, or Lamar Jackson. So that's I think, the big discussion point. And put a 4 in the chat and then who it is if it's other. So a 1 for Deshaun Watson, a 2 for Ryan Fitzpatrick, and then a 3 for Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, or Russell Wilson. So if you think that, I think that tier is interesting, obviously. Or a 4, and then who else would it be? Let's start there. Bunch of 1s and 2s in the chat. Love that. Look at this. Chat is flying. What's up, guys? If anyone's here for the first time, appreciate you. Seriously. This will be a lot of fun. A lot of 1s and 2s in the chat. We got a Joe Burrow in there. I love that one, Paul. PSU Dad in the chat. What's up, man? Mikey Boy's in here. Bo Glazer. Bunch of familiar faces here. Burrow. Couple Allen people. Ooh, some Baker people in here. I kind of like the game overall. Dallas and Cleveland. That's one that Leone and Peter and I were talking about last night. We were building our tilt space lineup. I think that one's interesting. Matthew Stafford for King. What about his? I mean, he's not going to give us a ton rushing though, right? Ben says he can't get away from Stafford. He's got some biases there. Okay. We got some Dak love in the chat. All right, so we're. It sounds like we're on a lot of the same pages here, though. A lot of people on Fitz, which I like to see, but a lot of people paying a little bit more for Deshaun Watson. It's interesting. Burrow is the one that I can't figure out. Let's do this, guys. Where do we think Burrow's ownership is going to be? Because he's not cheap. He's 6,300. I think if he's like sub 5%, I think he's interesting. But if he's closer to 10, I don't love it as much. None of these guys will actually play Baker. Austin just calling people out in the chat, man. Alpha, I'm not big on Drew Brees. I think that's the biggest thing is let's hang on. Let's go over the data sheet here, right? We haven't brought this in yet. So anyone that's seen this for the first time, linemovement.com, go to the resources tab, NFL data table. It's a free resource that we make available. It's basically each position and walking through some things that I think are super important at each of them. It's absolutely free. This is something that used to be a resource that I would give away to my Twitch subscribers. Now we're just giving it to everyone for free that goes to linemovement.com. So you're welcome. But I'll say this, guys, in terms of the salaries, we talked a little bit about this earlier today. What's different to me is that Fitzpatrick is a clear tier down at 5,400 than some of these other guys. But I also think I could say the same thing about Deshaun Watson at 6,600. Who's around Deshaun Watson? We've got Jared Goff. We've got Joe Burrow. And it's just kind of a no man's land in here. So if you're in this mid-range, I do prefer Deshaun Watson. I guess Joe Burrow is a reasonable pivot. I still think that Watson's the play. But we kind of got on this discussion because I think that rushing upside is something we've been talking about for years, of course, for floor, for ceiling, all of that. But we also, like, I think we fall into just like the late round quarterback thing, but also just in DFS paying down at quarterback. I actually kind of think that things have changed a little bit at the top. I don't know if like paying down at quarterback when you have Lamar, Russ, Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, these guys that will also run. I think there's a tier gap here that actually there's a little bit more opportunity cost at quarterback than there's been in quite some time. I think that I was the first one to just like blindly at times pay down at quarterback when something was there. So while I do love Fitzpatrick, and I will have some Fitzpatrick teams today, I can guarantee you that, I think we got to be cognizant of certain weeks when we do have a bunch of value and great ways to get up to these guys. I am prioritizing that. I have played some Lamar this year, and I've played a good amount of Russ, thankfully. But I think this tier gap for these guys that are giving us elite rushing, but also these teams that have pretty clear condensed target shares. That's what's been so valuable about Rush, guys, is we know where the ball is going. There's so much value in that. We're talking a little bit about Russ and Metcalf and Lockett earlier in the week, but if you can just lock down those type of target share numbers and that type of upside in a high total with a guy like Russell Wilson, who's also going to run, like, it's just such a great spot for fantasy. So I think, again, we're trying to make sure that we're adapting, but we're also like being overweight before people really truly correct. So 15% ownership, sure. I think that it's going to be relatively spread out at quarterback, guys. I really do. I think that one thing that I think is interesting, I've heard some smart people mention it already today, is that we don't have a ton of great slam dunk value. We'll talk about the Stone Min tight end that I suppose is in play, but one way to kind of get different in this Seattle and Miami game, and this is a game that I think we got to spend some time on, guys, because it's one that is really, really important for the slate. So I think that if you're going to be stacking up the Seattle side, one way to get different, this might sound crazy, is to play Fitzpatrick at quarterback, because the correlation between quarterback and opposing quarterback is one of the strongest correlations we have. So hear me out. If you're going to be playing Russ, if you're going to be playing Lockett, if you're going to be playing Metcalf, and you're bringing it back with someone on Miami, I think that's great. I think that's going to be very popular, and I think that's a route that a lot of people will be going in tournaments. But if you were to play Metcalf, Lockett with Fitz, the correlation is still very strong. And then you can still kind of get some of these other pieces that we're trying to prioritize, like getting to Kamara. Like if it's a difference between playing Fitz and Russ, and you're trying to basically upgrade from someone like Kenyon Drake to Kamara, or I guess maybe it's probably closer to someone like Nick Chubb or Josh Jacobs, and that gets you up to Kamara, I'm willing to do that personally. So I think that's really interesting. This game overall is one that we're really focused on. So let's go back here and kind of work through quarterback. I think those are the plays, though. I think that if you're paying all the way down, sure, I think that Fitz is totally fine. I love Watson in the mid-range. At the top end, It's going to be very spread out. I think that the Josh Allen side of things in tournaments is super interesting because I think he's going to be very low owned. That Leone is on that one big time, and I'm trying to figure out if I can get there. If he's at 10%, I think at higher stakes he might even be a little bit less because I think things will condense a little bit more around this Seattle-Miami game, potentially around this Dallas and Cleveland game a little bit more. But it's tough. Let's make sure I don't completely ignore some of the stuff in the chat here, guys. Love that we got over 550 people in here right now. We got another 50 on Twitch. So anyone over on Twitch right now, come join us on YouTube. Let's crack 700 live for the first time. I think that would be awesome. So yeah, if you're here for the first time, guys, I would love it if you consider subscribing along the way. One of the things that we really want to focus on at quarterback is quarterbacks that are willing to throw deep, but also are doing so in an efficient way. So I think that people want to talk about Lamar, he's 8,100, and some people just kind of skip over that. I think that Lamar's still really interesting if he ends up around 10% in this spot. Do you think Washington will be able to kind of fight back, I guess is always the question. But if Baltimore comes out and drops a 40 bomb, Lamar could be in for a huge day here. So I think that he is very interesting. If you're even in this range up here with Russ, Josh Allen, Dak Prescott, see what Lamar does to your roster if you end up going that way. I think Hollywood Brown's still someone that is waiting to pop, whether it's this week, whether it's next week, the week after. I think that it's still like his air yards are there, all of those things that we really want. The other thing that we really want to focus on at quarterback is high implied team totals because we know touchdowns are really going to affect the ceiling, of course, always. But there's just such a very deep, strong correlation for targeting some of these large totals. So Russ, Dak, all these guys, we're talking about them for sure. But I think just looking past that first tier can really lead us to some lower ownership at times. So people want to talk about Josh Allen, Kyler Murray. I kind of like them for tournaments a good amount. And Joe Burrow at 6,300 is kind of a direct price pivot off of Deshaun Watson. So I think we've gotten there. Let's move over to running back, guys, because I think this is a really interesting position this week. So a couple things before we start. Alvin Kamara at 8K. Again, I just think a guy that we can bank for about 7 catches, and his ceiling is what, 14 catches? Like he has a large range. Like he could literally be, without Michael Thomas in this game, he could be like almost the entire offense. Like we've seen it before. Like Breeze is just going to check it down. Breeze is not going to push the ball down the field. That's one of the reasons I don't like playing Breeze, outside of the fact that he doesn't run. But he's just not willing to throw the ball deep. And I don't really like that for my quarterback, but I do love that for my running backs. So one of the things we haven't talked about yet, at running back, we know we really want to focus on volume, all of those things, of course. So how many touches they're going to get, what the ownership is like, obviously team total is super important as well, all those things. We haven't mentioned this yet. So yards from scrimmage over the last 4. This is something we'll talk about a little bit more on Monday now that once we'll have 4 full weeks of data. But one of the things that I found in some of the research that I've done and some other smart people, TJ Hernandez and some other guys, of course, yards from scrimmage over the last 4, it's a little bit more predictive because it doesn't impact the touchdowns, but also it gives you some upside from some bigger plays that these guys have been breaking. So I think that Kamara, just leading the way in total yards from scrimmage over the last 4 games per game at over 100 yards per game. I think that's super interesting, but also someone that kind of popped a little bit for me here, James Robinson at 6,500. 84.7 yards from scrimmage over the past 4. I think that he is a guy that, again, we talked about Joe Burrow. If Joe Burrow goes completely nuclear in the spot at low ownership, I wouldn't be surprised if Robinson had some success on the other side. I kind of like that idea because he's so active in the passing game. So he's not like a blue chip type of running back play this week. I'm not saying that by any means, but I do think he's at least interesting for tournaments. Past Kamara, we can talk about Zeke a little bit. Of course, he's going to be very heavily owned for good reason. Playing Kamara and Zeke together is not the easiest thing to do in roster construction, but it is doable. And I'll definitely have some teams with both. You guys know my style. I'm going to pay up for running backs because we can really project this volume better than any type of position that we have outside of it, right? So just the roles of Kamara and Zeke through the passing game, but also at the goal line, is something that we can't really replicate with anyone else as of now, in my opinion. So really high totals, tight spreads, like these games should be high scoring, should be back and forth, all of those things. The biggest concern, I think, for Zeke is if Cleveland continues to run the ball as much as they have, maybe it ends up being a little bit less plays overall. I think that's one of the biggest concerns I have with this game. But I think that he'll be super involved. So I don't think there's a ton to worry about with Zeke. We obviously mentioned earlier that he is going to get his left tackle back, so I think that's interesting. Mike Davis, guys, 5,700. He's going to be super popular. I think he's a fantastic play. I really do. 5,700. I think he's too cheap. 13 rush attempts. Like, that's a little bit scary. But 9 targets, 8 targets over the last 2 games. He's just so active in the passing game that on a site like DraftKings, his floor is just extremely high. In this spot against Arizona, paced up spot, I think he's really, really strong. About 4 catches is the projection right now. I think that even this might be a little bit low at 17.5. I think we could see him approach 20, 22 touches, something like that. So I like Mike Davis quite a bit. Let's see if I missed anything here in the chat. Dallas is pass happy with Limit Steek's upside. I don't know about that, Vintage. He's so active in the passing game. Kamara, Drake, Henderson. Let's talk about Drake for a second since we're here. He's 6K. Drake is one that I have a love-hate relationship with right now. So Kenyon Drake is someone we've talked about a good amount. We know that Arizona, in theory, has been very efficient running the ball over the last little while. They've been playing an up-tempo pace. This Carolina spot is fantastic. This Carolina spot, for the record, like everyone was playing Kenyon Drake last week, this Carolina spot is probably even better in terms of matchup. So I like that quite a bit. He's going to be probably not as active as some of these other guys in the pass range, or I guess in the passing game as some of these other guys in this range. But I do prefer Kenyon Drake to Joe Mixon. I prefer Kenyon Drake to Myles Gaskin. I prefer Kenyon Drake to David Johnson. All of those guys. And the ability to, now that we have Nuke that's playing, we have Christian Kirk is playing, maybe Drake ends up getting going here with some of the other guys, other weapons that defenses will have to kind of focus on. So I do like Drake quite a bit. I'll say that. Some other guys at running back that I think are in the conversation. Let's talk about Myles Gaskin for a second. So I think this is going to be a popular way to go in this game. So Myles Gaskin is at 5K. I think that if you're playing Russ, I think Myles Gaskin is a really nice piece to play on the other side because you're going to need some savings. If you're playing Russ, you're probably playing Lockett or Metcalf or both. So you're going to need some savings. Gaskin is someone that in back-to-back games has had over 5 targets, over 5 catches, I should say, which is really nice. About 100 total yards in both of those spots. I mean, guys, he touched the ball 27 times last week. The game script is a concern, but I still think that he's active enough that he's totally fine. I think he's totally fine in Fitzpatrick stacks overall. So I'm in on that. I'm in on Gaskin. I've been kind of talking about him as a salary relief type of play most of the week. I think he's super interesting. A couple people in the chat are asking about Henderson or Malcolm Brown. And Scott, I see your subscription, by the way. I appreciate you, man. Thanks for being with us. So yeah, this is, if you're here for the first time, these are plays that I struggle with a little bit personally. So Henderson, he's 5,800. He's not super cheap. We know that LA is going to run the ball more than almost any team in the league. 3 targets back-to-back games. I understand that. He had 20 touches on the ground last week. Gets 100 yards, gets a touchdown. I think this is a spot where LA could be ahead. And I think that the Vegas total blitz.bet.eu definitely agrees with me. That spread is approaching 2 touchdowns right now, which is pretty crazy. So 5,800 for a guy like that, I think is interesting. What is his, like these slight timeshares, all of that stuff? I think if I'm just trying to make a decision between Darrell Henderson and some of these other guys that we've talked about in some of these high total games, Mike Davis versus Darrell Henderson, I think it's still Mike Davis for me, guys. It's like the same exact price point. I'm actively trying not to play both. I'll say that. Like the Darrell Henderson thing, I think is a tougher decision to make than the Rojo one. The Rojo one's easy for me, and someone was mentioning that before. Guys, I don't think this is a play we have to make in DFS. I'll say that because these running back slots are so valuable. He's 4,700, which is, again, it's a tier down. I understand all of that. But this guy had 13 carries last week, 4 targets. Like, I get it. I don't love this game overall. I mentioned that a couple of times. I think that Tampa Bay is a team that wants to lean on defense, all of those things, limit plays, sure. If I was confident Ronald Jones was going to be more active in the passing game, we saw that like in flashes at times last year, then maybe. I just think he's at a spot to where he's kind of a tweener for me, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think the ceiling is there that's there with some of these other guys for if you have a little bit more salary to spend. So, like, I like the ceiling for Darrell Henderson more. I like the ceiling for Myles Gaskin more, I think, in a game that I like a lot more. I think that, I mean, I very much focus on game environment. You guys know that about me by now. Paying up a little bit more for some of these other guys, like Ronald Jones versus, I just don't think I can do it, guys. I understand the play. I just think that in a week where we have these like very, very solid running back plays at the top, we haven't even talked about Dalvin Cook or Josh Jacobs or Jonathan Taylor yet. So I don't know. I'm not really on that train. Someone's asking about Singletary in the chat. Singletary, I thought was going to be a fantastic play if Zach Moss was not back, but their rookie running back is back now. So I think that could, in theory, take at least enough from Singletary away to make him not really in play for me at 5,900. So I was excited to play Singletary because I do like this Buffalo game a lot. And I think it's one that could funnel to the running backs in the passing game and on the ground. But it's tough when it's a backfield that's just they're splitting time. So DP says Rojo trap week. DP, I always listen to what you say in the chat, man, because DP comes in here and throws a lot of really sharp takes in here on Mondays, on Wednesdays, all of those things. So if you guys aren't joining us on Mondays and Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern time, we walk through the slate. But also these Sunday morning streams are special. Over 600 people in the chat right now. We're at 157 likes, and we're a half an hour into the show. I appreciate it, guys. Anything else at running back that we should talk about? I'll say this. I think Jonathan Taylor at 6,600 might be one of the best plays on the slate. If we're just focusing on volume, guys, I got him for almost 22 touches right now. Not as active as some of these other elite guys in the passing game, but I like Jonathan Taylor a lot in this spot against Chicago. I think he's someone that like people have been kind of burned by a little bit. So maybe they don't want to go back to him, but I love the price. I get that he only had 13 carries last week, but the week before he had 26. Like, I think my biggest problem with him is that he's not as active in the passing game, of course, but in tournaments, like especially large field stuff, I think he's really interesting. I'm not as big on Josh Jacobs, though I do think, again, both of those guys, like if you're looking for pivots, like what happened last week, guys, we had all of these great running back plays. One of them fails, and then you had Dalvin Cook at super low ownership. Like these second tier running backs that we can still project for volume, that's the way you get weird at running back. You don't get weird at running back by like firing at these timeshares. Like that's not the way to do it. These guys that have like a 13, 15 touch ceiling, like no, that's not what we do here. But Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon, these guys that we know are going to see volume that might be a little bit lower owned than some of these other guys, that's how you get different at running back in tournaments. So I'm with you on that. Henderson is PFF's number 1 rated running back so far. Vincent, yeah, I've seen that one actually. I'll say this, though. I just don't think that the running back talent matters near as much than a position like wide receiver. But it is what it is. I think Henderson's a fine play, for the record. He's just not like a core play for me right now. A core play for me, which seems like, is Dalvin Cook really going to be 8% owned? That can't be right. I love Dalvin Cook again this week. At 7,600, I still think that's a really nice price point for him. I think you could argue that his ceiling is right there with Zeke's, very similar, at a very similar price point. Maybe that's why the ownership is low, because Kamara is going to be heavily owned. Zeke is going to be heavily owned, and they're all expensive. Can we make lineups with all three? Kamara, Zeke, Cook? Has anyone tried that in the chat? Someone in chat right now, try and make a lineup with Kamara, Zeke, and Cook and tell me if you can do it. I might have to do that on at least one team. On FanDuel, I'm sure you can, because FanDuel, you can do whatever you want. I think we've exhausted the running back position, guys. Nick was asking, what website is this on? This is LineMovement.com, guys. So this is a site that I started with a bunch of help, obviously, throughout kind of the beginning of this season. Our public company, i3 Interactive. We have a content site, LineMovement.com. We also have a sports book, blitzbet.eu. So make sure you guys check that out. But resources tab, NFL data table. This is a free resource that we make available to all of you guys. So make sure you guys check that out. The wide receiver position. We're here. We made it. It's a great transition, though, because looking at this data sheet, the wide receiver position is one that you should be looking at some very specific things, in my opinion. We want guys that are seeing deeper targets. We want guys that are seeing a large percent of their target share. So volume is the most important thing. But weighted opportunity, this column right here, WOPR, over the last 4. It's basically exactly what I just said. It's a metric. Josh Hermsmeyer, shout out him, airyards.com. It's honestly one of the most predictive things at the wide receiver position. I look at this heavily when I'm deciding who I want to play in DFS, who I'm playing in season long. So basically, weighted opportunity rating, one guy that stands out to me right away, we got to talk about DJ Moore, guys. This game against Arizona, we talked about it. We love the pace, all of those things. 5,600. DJ Moore is this price. Like, he's $1,000 cheaper than he was to start the year. He's this price because he hasn't scored a touchdown yet, not because of the volume. So I love DJ Moore today. I don't think that that's an unpopular take, but I think he's really good chalk. Just because I think he's underpriced in an up-tempo game. I think the ceiling in terms of his volume is there. He's going to score at some point. I could see it being in this spot. So just like literally just sorting by weighted opportunity and seeing some drastic price inefficiencies, I think DJ Moore is right there. Odell Beckham's an interesting one in terms of guys that are probably underpriced relative to their value overall. I don't really know what to do with OBJ, if I'm being completely honest. I think he's one that I haven't really gotten right historically, for sure. I think that just like he scored a touchdown on 6 targets last week in week 2, but he followed that up with another 6 targets the week after. So I think that his volume is still relatively safe. So if you're looking for a bring back in this game, this Dallas game, I think that OBJ he's going to pop off at some point. I think he's slightly underpriced. So one of the guys that was a clear standout from the start of the week. Is it Brandon Cooks week, guys? Are we here? Are we finally here? 4,500. I kind of like the fact that Fuller's in. Like Cooks, like we talked about Deshaun Watson ad nauseum throughout this entire week. I think this is a spot. Like this might be one of the last times we can buy low on Deshaun Watson in this Houston offense because their schedule to start the year was absolutely horrendous. They played some of the best teams in the league, and now they get, well, not the best team in the league. In fact, one of the worst defenses in the league with the Vikings. So I'm all over Brandon Cooks. I think that he's a guy that they're moving around the field. They're moving him into the slot. They do feed him some deeper targets as well. His weighted opportunity at 0.5, very solid for that type of scenario. We want these guys that have some after the catch upside for sure. Again, this matchup is very strong for that also. So I'm kind of in on Brandon Cooks. I think that $4,500 price tag is just one of those guys that I think is going to provide a higher ceiling for sure than his salary. Someone in the chat was talking about Renfro is greater than Cooks. I'm on the Cook side of that. I do like Renfro. So let's talk about Renfro at a very similar price point. He's 4,600. So we got Ruggs out. Bryan Edwards is out. So the volume in theory is there. At least on the outside, we've got guys like Zay Jones, Nelson Aguilar. They're cycling through. I still think that this is a Darren Waller game, personally. But I like, this is one that we talked about with Matt Harmon earlier in the week. So Renfro is someone that he really likes from reception, perception, all of those things. I don't know exactly what to do because the Bills' perimeter, like defensive backs, they're very good. So if we think that just this guy in the slot, Renfro in particular, can really get shred and do some things after the catch, I think the play makes a lot of sense. I think it's a better play on FanDuel for sure because it's obviously full PPR. The touchdowns don't matter as much. But if this guy gets like 6-7 targets, I think Renfro is very strong. So Renfro is going to be relatively popular for sure. But if you're looking for like a pivot off of Brandon Cooks, I think you could do worse. So the ownership right now for Renfro looks at like 2 to 4%. I think that's a little bit low. But if that's true, sure, maybe he's the Cooks pivot. I don't mind that. Jonathan Taylor or James Robinson? I think it's Jonathan Taylor for me, Spiros. Woods, Kupp, or both? I think it's Woods for me, Richard. My concern with that is that I think that like we're not seeing Goff push the ball down the field enough, personally, for me. So I think that's the one that would hold me back a little bit on stacking up that game. But as a one-off, I think it's Woods for me. So let's talk about these Miami guys. So Miami, let's make this a little bit deeper here for us. So Miami, I think if we want to talk ourselves into an Isaiah Ford 3,700, I think there's worse value plays on the slate. There's really not a lot of wide receivers below 4K that I like, but he's doing his thing in the slot. Devontae Parker at 5,700, he's too cheap, especially in this spot where we know the game script is going to be there. I think that he's someone that is a priority for me personally with my Fitzpatrick stacks. I get it. He's only had 5 targets last week, only 5 catches in 2 straight games. But I still think the volume is relatively safe. He has had some decent red zone involvement. I just think that this is a guy towards the end of last season that we were really Just heavily invested in this passing game, I should say. Obviously, they had some injuries last season as well. But Devontae Parker, 5,700, he's my priority number 2 because I do think it's Gaskin week overall. I think in this spot against Seattle's totally fine to just let the middle of the field just eat. They don't pressure much, but they also kind of sit back a little bit and try and take away over the top. So I think that Gaskin is my number 1 pairing guy with Fitzpatrick. Devontae Parker, I think, is interesting. So Preston Williams versus Gaskin, or versus Parker, I should say. Significant price discount, probably a decent ownership pivot. I think Preston Williams might be the lowest owned guy in this entire group of those 3. Preston Williams is one that I had to talk to Harmon about also, because Harmon's he's very much with me on Gaskin. He made that very clear. But I think that Preston Williams at 4,500, what I like about him, he's like a more raw Devontae Parker in some ways. So what I like about him is that in this spot where Seattle, they're not going to pressure. And if they do attempt to pressure, I don't think they're really going to have a ton of success because they're content just letting the game come to them. But what that does is Fitzpatrick's going to have more time. And what more time means is his wide receiver is going to be able to get downfield. So Devontae Parker, Preston Williams, they're going to have time to get down there. And Fitz is going to throw some YOLO balls. That much we know, right? So Fitz is not scared to throw it deep. I think that both of these guys are very squarely in play. Yes, if you have the salary, sure, play Devontae Parker, play Gaskin. But don't sleep on Preston Williams at 4,500. I think that I would be shocked if I don't have some stacks that are just very, very onslaught-esque type of stacks, because if Fitz goes out there and has his ceiling game where he throws 4 or 5 touchdowns, all of these guys could get there because their prices are at the spot where they could, right? We got Noel Fan in the chat. He finally found us over on YouTube. What's up, Noel? Thanks for your super chat, man. Appreciate you. Harbs is in here. Do I have any Jalen Guyton? Ooh, okay. So that's one that, what's his price, Harbs? As of now, I don't have a ton of him. I'll say that. That's an interesting one, though. I got to check his price here. Harbs is making me go deep. 3,400. Okay. Let's check this out. This one's a little bit thin for me, but he did play 63 of 74 snaps last week. I'll say this, Harbs. I don't love that game, man. I don't think that Chargers and Tampa Bay game is one I'm going to be overly excited about. Will Mike Evans be highly owned? I don't think so. No, I don't think that game's going to be super popular. Maybe Rojo ends up gaining some steam. I'm not really in on it, to be perfectly honest. I want Devontae Parker, but he doesn't look over his injury. Parker doesn't look over his injury, or, I mean, Preston Williams is the one that everyone's talking about not separating. So I don't know. Garbage time points. Yeah, that's the thing. Can Fitz bring us all the way there to keep this game back and forth? That's the biggest concern, I think, with the Lockett and Metcalf shares, is if you think that Fitzpatrick is just getting too much love right now and he's not able to kind of keep this thing close, then that's going to really hurt some of these rust stacks. Start 3, Metcalf, Parker, Woods, or Julio. Metcalf and Parker. The Julio one is... Julio's not on the main slate, so I'm just looking at it. He's questionable as right now. I just want to make sure. Yeah, I mean, you're starting Julio if he's in. Doozy says, what the fuck is a super chat? Doozy is a long-time Twitch truther with us. What's up, Doozy? Speaking of Twitch, we still got 66 people over there on Twitch. Guys, we might hit 700 for the first time on YouTube today. So if you're over on Twitch, help us do it. A lot of the chat that's happening is over on YouTube these days. So appreciate everyone. If anyone's here for the first time, again, would love it if you would consider subscribing, hit a like. Make sure you hit that notification bell also so that you know when I go live. We just went over 200 likes for this stream. So that's fantastic. Appreciate everyone being here. I'll be live again directly after this on the Line Movement YouTube channel. So I'm going to go ahead and drop a link in the chat for that. We'll keep our sports betting and all that stuff rolling. Me, Peter Overzet, and a special guest today, as Dieter is out. He's doing something out of town this week. We're going to try and make it work, but overall, I'm excited for that show. That'll be fun. Obviously, if you guys haven't checked out the Tilt Space at 6:30 p.m., Peter Overzet won 10 grand on stream last week. Michael Leone won the Juke the week before. So we've had some success. We might have to change the name of the show. If we're going to continue to do that. Maybe it won't be the Tilt Space. Maybe it'll be the Print Space, something like that. But we're due to have a rough week on that podcast. We build a team together. We also basically enter a cumulative super contest picks for the Vegas 5K entry super contest, which is a lot of fun. Picks against the spread, all that. If you're here again, you can't make the live streams on Mondays and Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Just dropped a link in the chat. Also, all of them go up on the podcast feed now also for the Joe Holka Show. So support me over there. Drop me a rating and review. Really appreciate it. Let's jump back into wide receiver, guys. We still have some time here. And I think that this is still one that, like, we talked through what I think are some of the better plays, DJ Moore, Cooks, Renfro, those type of plays. If you're paying all the way up in this spot, DeAndre Hopkins, like, what do we think? This is my question. What do we think DeAndre Hopkins ownership is going to be like this week coming off injuries? 8,500. Like, people aren't going to have the salary for him, right? Let's get a couple people in the chat. What's the ownership for DeAndre Hopkins this week? Because I'm kind of interested, and I don't really pay up for wide receivers very often, but that type of volume is something, right? Is today Gronk day? Oh, I hope we're here, right? We finally made it. If it's Gronk day, I probably won't be there for it. Lock Keenan Allen. T. Higgins at 4,500. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I think there's better options. So who do we miss? Adam Thielen at 6,600. This guy's probably still too cheap too. So we're trying to figure out the best bringbacks on the Houston side. Like my first choice is always going to be Dalvin Cook. You guys know me. But I do think Thielen's interesting at 6,600 if you can make it work in a game stack with Watson, something like that. I think that's interesting. Metcalf, Lockett, like all these guys. Like the fact that Metcalf and Lockett are both at a 0.7 weighted opportunity is insane. We like never see this from two guys in the same offense. So I love that. What are you guys doing with the Dallas game? Who are we pairing Dak with? I think if you're playing Dak, you got to play him with at least 2 pass catchers. That's my feeling on it. And I think it's Amari and who is it? Who is it? Who's Amari? Like, who's the other guy you're pairing your Dak stacks with? I think for me, it's Amari and CeeDee Lamb. I'm willing to move off the Gallup week. I got my Gallup last week finally. I just think that it makes sense now that the price gap is significant. Like CeeDee Lamb's 5,400, Gallup 62. Gallup is only $500 cheaper than Amari, which I don't love. So those are the two guys I'm on. Of course, like you can put Zeke on any of those type of stacks. But I'm not really on Gallup this week, surprisingly. I think he'd be the last one in for me. Amari. Oh, Schultz is an interesting one. Thanks for that, Pat. Yeah, if you're trying to like, this is a terrible week at tight end, guys. We'll get to that shortly. But I don't love, I don't hate the idea of going Schultz because I think it's a really thin position this week. Amari and Schultz. Okay. There's a lot of people on Schultz. Interesting. Aaron says he's going to eat on that beat-up linebacking core. That could be. Richard's asking about Cousins. Will we have to throw a lot? Probably. I'm not big on playing Cousins for DFS, though. I just don't like these guys that don't give us ceiling on the ground. Like, Cousins, like, to completely get there, he's got to throw 4 or 5 touchdowns to, like, hit the ceiling of some of these other guys that run, in my opinion. Like, I talk a lot about field size and what types of tournaments you're playing, all of those things. I still think that the ceiling is not there. King says, talk to me about AJ Green. Man, I don't know what to do with AJ Green. I think he's interesting for sure. Like, people think he is just completely washed. But the volume is there, right? That's why I'm struggling with it. If he's not separating all of those things, like I get that. But I think at some point, AJ Green's going to have a huge game. Like multiple touchdown game. So that's an interesting price range, I think. Because what do we think about T.Y. Hilton? Like this wide receiver core is absolutely decimated. Is this like the post grandma hype sleeper play of the week? Like, is that a thing? I kind of like T.Y. Hilton. I think T.Y. Hilton and A.J. Green are both interesting kind of bounce back plays. Like Pittman's out, Paris Campbell out. The Colts are going to have to kind of increase that snap count a little bit for T.Y., or at least to increase some of the volume that he's getting. I think he's really cheap. I mean, he's quietly 12th in air yard target share this year. I mean, the matchup is definitely easier to throw on than to run on against the Bears. So I think T.Y. is really interesting, actually. If you're looking for like a one-off, I like it quite a bit. Scott K, thanks for your subscription, man. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate all the new people. I still can't believe we had like 25 people just here before the stream talking football. That was awesome. Always is worth me on AJ Green. I like that. Spencer says sneaky 2 touchdowns from TY. I wouldn't mind that. I wouldn't mind seeing that. Shane, thanks for your subscription, man. Spencer, bunch of people. Subscription run. Thanks, guys. A lot of analysts feel that Seattle-Miami game is the game to target. I am one of those people. I love that game, man, for sure. So I think that's a good transition to tight end. Let's move over. I think that overall this week, guys, Gaskin is a huge, huge priority for me. We talked about that quite a bit throughout the week, Mondays, Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern time. That's where the majority of we work through the slate early in the week. And I think that Gaskin is one that stood out right away. We talked about him on the first look. We talked about him with Reeves, and we're talking through the matchups, all of those things. I think that he is the one that probably benefits the most in this matchup. Seattle is just not a team that really cares a ton to really defend in that area of the field that he kind of operates. So I think he's the one that I'm prioritizing in a week where I think tight end is not a very strong position overall. Gaskin still leading Miami in air yard share, 31%. We know Fitzpatrick's going to have to throw. I think the ceiling is there. Part of the reason I like him so much is because their strong safety in Seattle, Jamal Adams, is still out with that groin injury. So the problem is he's 5,100. It's tough. It's a tough week to pay that. But I'll say this. Again, I'm going to keep hammering weighted opportunity. If you take one thing from this whole talk, go to linemovement.com, resources tab, NFL data table, this column right here, weighted opportunity for tight ends and wide receivers. It gets you halfway there on finding some of the plays. It really does. Gaskin at 5%, that's not right. He'll be higher on than that at high stakes for sure. One thing that I really like, though, yards per route run. You'll typically find some of these freak athletes, or sometimes you'll find some guys that don't run a ton of routes overall. But Gaskin, Henry, Hawkinson, Waller, these guys that are running wide receiver types of routes, I think are super valuable for fantasy. So 5,100, I love him quite a bit. I think that team total is extremely important at the tight end position also, because we know it's going to be very touchdown heavy in general. We obviously want guys that are running routes, not blocking. That's obviously a thing for tight ends. So let's talk about Logan Thomas. And then, yes, everyone wants to know if they can play Trotman at 2,500. We'll talk about him in a second. So Logan Thomas at 3,500. My issue with this is the team total is under 17 points at blitzbet.eu. Also, I have issues with this quarterback. Haskins has to be able to deliver him more high quality volume for me to be super excited about Logan Thomas. Yes, all of the data would tell you that he is a drastically underpriced, a 0.5 weighted opportunity, all of those things. He's not running deeper routes, which I don't love. So I guess it's all not great. But I just think they're the catchable balls, the touchdown upside, those are big things at tight end too. Also, I think that Logan Thomas eventually we chase and he finally gets there because volume is king at all of this. So I'm not saying that I won't get there with Logan Thomas, especially we talked about it at the very start. This is a gross week at tight end. So I'm not scared to fade Logan Thomas if he's going to be super chalky overall at that price range. One thing I guess that might lead to him not being super chalky is Adam Trotman. He's 2,500, 32-58 snaps last week. I guess we don't know the exact type of rotation there's going to be in New Orleans, but 2,500 does a lot for us on this slate, guys. It does, for sure. Let's do a quick poll in the chat. So again, price considered, who is the better play between Logan Thomas at 3,500 and Trotman at 2,500? So 1 in the chat for Logan Thomas, 2 in the chat for Trotman. I want to see where we're at as a community right now with this play, because I think this is a big decision for a lot of people, especially if you're playing cash games, because it allows you to get to it allows you to get Kamara and Dalvin in the same lineup, and Zeke, Kamara in the same lineup. That's the path. So 1 in the chat for Logan Thomas, 2 in the chat for Trotman. Price considered, who's the better play today? We're talking mostly tournaments. We'll start there. A lot of Trotman people in the chat already. Oh, are we going to do this to ourselves? We're going to do this. We're going to play this Stoneman tight end. What if he gets us a 0, fam? That could happen. So this link I'm dropping in the chat right now, this is the Line Movement YouTube channel. If you're playing Trotman and you're not at the tilt space with us, me, Michael Leone from Establish the Run, Peter Overzet, 6:30 p.m. After all this happens, we'll know what happened with the Trotman play by that point. So if you put a 2 in the chat just now and you were not at the tilt space with us later today, I'm going to be really upset because I want to tilt this together. Because I'm not saying I'm not going to play him, but we'll see what happens. Harb says he's not playing either. Okay, a couple neither people. So let's say this: if you're not playing Logan Thomas, if you're not playing Trotman, put a 3 in the chat and who your favorite tight end play is on the week. Let's say not Gaskin, because we already talked about him a lot. So with 3, not Logan Thomas, not Trotman, not Gaskin, who is it? Frost says you had the money lineup you reviewed last week that cashed, had from 0 from John Brown. Yeah, getting a 0 from John Brown was not fun last week, Frost. I do like the stack again this week with Buffalo, though. No shot on playing Trotman over Gaskin or Hawkinson. Yeah, but price is a thing, Flash. I'm with you. He says he can find other ways to save salary. I think that's true. Michael says he's playing Akins. I don't mind that one. We talked about Akins a bunch. He was on the value video this week. Vargas, thanks for your subscription, man. Appreciate you being with us. Waller. Bunch of Waller love. Okay. Hawkinson. Hawkinson seems to be a popular play at 4,800 this week. I got him at about 11% ownership. I think that's fine. Doozy's going back to John Brown this week. Are you? Interesting. Really interesting. So I think at tight end for me, guys, if I had to really kind of narrow it down, if I'm paying all the way up, I think it's Gaskin. It's very close between Gaskin and Waller for me up there. I think in the mid-range, sure, I think Hawkinson's fine, especially on FanDuel, actually. Hawkinson's 5,400 on FanDuel. So I think that makes a lot of sense. If I'm paying all the way down, Logan Thomas, Trotman, sure. It's just the Logan Thomas thing, like they have to be able to move the ball, which I'm not, I guess, convinced that they'll be able to do. But I understand the volume is there, all those things. But with Jared Cook out, like Trotman just coming in at 2,500, I'm not scared to take a 0, guys. You've seen it before. If it allows me to play the running backs I want to play and still get up to some decent wide receiver options with upside, I like that quite a bit. We got about 15 minutes left, so I definitely want to get to some Q&A at some point. But what do we like at defense this week? What's the cheapest defense we're willing to play? Let's start there. So I think there's a couple options. At defense, like the one that I'm kind of on DraftKings in particular, is Houston. They're 2,500. I haven't been able to get comfortable with anything under the Texans at 2,500. I guess what's unfortunate is Houston still doesn't like pressure a ton. But I think that what are some of the other things we look at defense? We want game script. We want passing. I think there's a chance that Houston gets up in this game for sure. So there's going to be some passing involved for Kirk Cousins. We know this offensive line in Minnesota struggles quite a bit. Cousins will make mistakes. We know that. We know their offensive line isn't good. All those things. Even if the Texans aren't bringing a ton of heat, I'm not scared of like these high pace, high scoring games. None of that matters. I want pressure. I want turnovers. That's the only thing I care about in DFS. So if you're in a spot where you can actually pay up a little bit more, I mentioned I like the Ravens quite a bit this week. Again, like I don't have a lot of confidence that Haskins is going to be able to do anything against the Ravens. So 4K is super expensive, but depending on ownership, like if they end up being super popular, like it's sitting at 18% right now. I have a hard time being like 18% of people are going to find the salary to play the Ravens at high stakes at least. So I think that's interesting. We talked about the Bucks. I think that's one of the ones that's just very clearly in favor of this Bucks front seven. I think they're going to be able to get some pressure for sure. So I like that. I hate to like just put these fast and easy rules like target rookie quarterbacks, but Justin Herbert in this game where he's going to be forced to drop back a ton, I think is really interesting. So I think that the Buccaneers at 3,400, if you don't have the salary for the Ravens, like that's the mid-tier one I like. So Ravens, Bucks, and Texans are like my favorites, I think. So let's see what you guys are on in the chat. We got a couple people talking about the Chargers D line. We're very spread out at defense right now. Chargers D on the other side of that game, 2,900. So I don't typically target Tom Brady from a defense perspective. That's my thing. And it's nothing to say about Tom Brady. It's because he's kind of like Rodgers in some ways where he's totally content just throwing the ball away. He gets the ball out quick. So like the pressure doesn't affect him as much. And it's not as good for fantasy. Like sure, we saw him just absolutely hand a pick six to someone in week 1. We don't see that very often from Brady. So no, I'm not really on that spot. I do like the Texans D at 2,500. I'm with you, Ryan. Cleveland's interesting, Sam. That was like the one that I was going through earlier at 2,300 against Dallas. I think that one's kind of interesting too. Again, like targeting these games where you think there's going to be a ton of points. So I don't care about any of that. I care about pressure, and I think the Browns would bring pressure. So I like that one. 2,300. That's the cheapest, I think, and I don't love it. Dallas, solid punt play if they get up early. Yeah, maybe both sides of that game, Michael. I just think my concern there, I guess, yeah, if they get up early, we're going to get more passing attempts from Baker. So that makes some sense. They just want to run the ball a ton, right? Miami defense, that's a way to leverage. Let's do this, guys. Let's talk a little bit about some of the top leverage plays. So what typically we want to do here, and we talk about this a lot, is if we're going to be playing some guys in this afternoon area. So what's kind of rough is the afternoon games kind of suck today. So Giants, Rams, we got Colts and Bears. We have Buffalo and Oakland, or Buffalo and Vegas. I'm going to do that all year long, calling them the Oakland Raiders. So normally, with the way that late swap works the best is if there's a ton of ownership in the afternoon, like last week. This week, I don't think there's going to be a ton of ownership in the afternoon. So we'll kind of know. But if we want to just look at some of the top leverage plays overall on this slate, I think that at the tight end position, it's probably, like, if you want to go really cheap, I think that Jordan Akins brings you a little bit of leverage at 3,300 on the cheaper side. On the more expensive side, I like Mark Andrews and Hunter Henry. I think tight end, it's a slate where maybe we want to get different at tight end if people are just going to cluster around the one or two expensive or paying all the way down for the one or two cheap guys. Those are ones where I like to get a little bit different. At running back, I think the clear leverage is Jonathan Taylor at 6,600. I like him quite a bit. Maybe Chubb at 7K if a lot of people are just going to end up playing the passing side of this Dallas game. I think that's a good spot to attack. Dalvin Cook at 7,600. If everyone's going to be playing Alvin Kamara and Zeke, I love Dalvin Cook today from a leverage perspective. Quarterback, I think it's going to be relatively spread out, but some of the guys that I think offer some leverage, Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson. So again, these are just some guys that I would consider having some exposure to in DFS. DeAndre Hopkins, again, you're just going to flip roster construction on its head a little bit if you go that direction. So I think he's one that I'll be prioritizing at least one DeAndre Hopkins share today, for sure. Treikwan Smith, I think, is interesting in the New Orleans side of that game. 5K, again, like it's probably a play that's going to be like sub 1% ownership. But I think that one's it's an okay leverage spot with a lot of people all over Kamara, that sort of thing. I hate to even say it, is Latavius Murray someone that leverages us on FanDuel if everyone's playing Kamara? I heard a couple people talking about it, but haven't mentioned it so far. DBM, spamming the chat is not a way to get me to answer a question, for the record. Robert mentioned Latavius Murray. I think that's interesting. On FanDuel, maybe. James Robinson's a good one, Ben. I think he's interesting for sure. Yay or nay, I'm playing Zeke, Cook, and Kamara. Ian, if you can make it work, my friend, you're not going to get any pushback on that from me. All the running backs. I might have a team like that today. We'll see. See if I can make it work. I think that this Buffalo stack with Stephon Diggs offers a ton of value in terms of leverage. So I think that one's really interesting. I'd be surprised if we didn't end up on one of those with the tilt space. I guess we know what the DB means in his name. Don't give DBM any crap. He just wants to get his question answered. He just has to know that's not the way to do it. Low buy on lines D. You think so? That's an interesting one. Guys, we got about 10 minutes here, so let's get your final questions in here. We got about 239 likes already. Guys, I appreciate it. 600 people. We're growing, right? So week 1, we had about 500 people here. It's only week 4, and we got 600. We're growing, and it's part of the reason is because you guys are helping us out with the likes, the comments, all of that stuff. So I appreciate it, guys. Seriously. We still got like 66 people over on Twitch just hanging out. Maybe they think I'm playing Valorant or something. Renfro, low wide receiver. I like Renfro a lot. We talked about him as one of the value plays that I like. Any Bears to play? Let's take a look at some Bears. Because I kind of like the Colts a bit in this spot. In terms of Bears, like maybe you could probably talk me into a David Montgomery share, I guess. I don't love it. I don't love many Bears in this spot. The answer to that's probably always Allen Robinson. John says great stuff. Happy to support. Hey, happy to have you here with us, man. How much of a percent of a wide receiver is too much learning how to use an optimizer? What's up, Rod Dog? I think that this is a spot where you can't just have a specific rule and say that it's too much, it's not enough. It's all about what type of I think it's all about what type of risk tolerance you're willing to take on, man. Me personally, I'm not scared to lock a guy in. I'm not scared to lock in Alvin Kamara today if I'm playing MME. I do a lot of hand building because I really focus on correlation and leverage and some of the higher stake stuff. But I don't know if you can have a specific fast rule, I'll say. So I think that's interesting. DBM, appreciate your super chat, man. You don't have to do that to get your question answered. That's for sure. So Julio, he's questionable right now, man. So it's a really tough call for you. I think if you have other options, it's a spot where, yes, if you're a little bit worried about him being, I guess, even hampered by that hamstring injury, maybe you just go to someone like you just said, you got OBJ as an option. I think that makes some sense, man. It's all about being safe in that scenario, probably. Renfro and cash, though, I think he's safe for cash. I do. Is the Saints? What else we got here? Cooks or Renfro? Cooks for me. Patterson sneaky value. I think that one's thin. Leverage would be Saints wide receivers. Yeah, who are you on, Ben? Is it a spot where we can go? I think that the leverage for me at wide receiver for the Saints is probably Treikwan, but I don't know. Maybe it's Sanders. Any love for Hunt, assuming they are behind early? So Fritz, I think that those plays are tougher for DFS because if we can't project him for a ton of volume, like 15 to 20 touches, I don't typically play those guys. Brett Murphy says, started watching last week. Keep up the good work, man. Appreciate you, Brett. Doing the best I can to bring you guys value, right? On that note, if anyone's still wondering what we've been kind of displaying this entire time, linemovement.com. If you go to the resources tab here, NFL data table, each position, we got ownership projections in here. We got a bunch of different metrics from next gen stats, a bunch of different stuff like that. We got some projections also. Really super valuable if you're playing DFS, season long, sports betting, all of those things. I'll say this too, guys. If you can't be here for one of the live streams on Mondays or Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern time, would love it if you guys could support the podcast with a rating and review. Just dropped a link to that in the chat. All of the stuff that happens here on YouTube also goes up on the podcast feed. That's something new that I'm doing this year. So would love it if you guys could help out, help that grow also. I'll say this, directly after this show, we are going to have a show on the Line Movement YouTube channel. Drop that link in the channel or in the chat also. I'm going to walk through a little bit more of some sports betting stuff, but also continue to work through some of the news that's coming through and make sure you guys are ready. So we have a special guest today, so make sure you guys come and check that out. Always a really fun show. Ryan doesn't understand Allen at 5%. Yeah. I think he's a ton of leverage today, man. Are we too slow at adapting to what Josh Allen is now? He's looked good. I have some bias there just because I've been pretty long on Josh Allen from the start. Do I like Chark this week? Chark could be some leverage. Good luck, Harbs. Thanks for being with us, brother. Always appreciate the takes from Harbs. Oh, yeah, Ben. We're doing it. Yeah, if anyone's going to come over to the show directly after this, I want to hear you guys say, "We are back" in the chat, so I know that you came over from the show. Final questions, guys. We're going to kind of work through a couple more of these for sure until we get out of here. I'm laughing because TJ Hernandez just messaged me. He goes, first hangover build of the year, going to be a big day. Every time TJ gets hungover and builds lineups, he just wins everything. So make sure you guys check out anything TJ wrote this week because it's probably the nuts. Tyler Boyd, a good play this week. I like Tyler Boyd a lot in those stacks, my friend. I like him a lot. No Keenan Allen. I think Keenan's fine. I just don't like that game overall, man. Not big on that game. I'm pretty condensed right now, which is scary in terms of the games I'm really trying to target for stacks. James Robinson over Mike Davis for cash? I don't think so. I think Mike Davis for cash. I think the floor there with the receptions is what I'd be trying to go after. Devontae Parker or DJ Moore? Half PPR. That's a tough one, man. Half PPR probably leans me to Parker, but DJ Moore feels like the much safer play there. I'm just very, very bullish on Fitzpatrick today, so I want to think that Parker's going to have a big day. Ben says he won his biggest GPP on a hangover. Love that, man. Sometimes you just don't overthink it, and that's the best thing that could ever happen. Ben Harley says TJ is a GOAT for sure. I love TJ as a human being. Football is like secondary with TJ Hernandez. If you guys don't know TJ, 4for4 football, great guy. He's been doing a bunch of stuff with us also. So every other week he'll do a show with me that goes on the Line Movement channel. Go through like our top plays for DFS. So make sure you guys check that video out this past week. It was his first appearance. Always fun. Drake or Davis? We probably didn't talk about Drake enough, honestly. I do like Drake today a lot, especially if like the ownership is really going to condense on some of these other running backs. Drake is going to have a day. I'm really scared to jump off because we've been all over him and he hasn't quite gotten there on like his opportunities so far. Like if this is the week where I don't play any Drake and he goes crazy, I'm going to be really upset with myself. For sure. Twitch numbers are just going up. We got 77 people over on Twitch. Anyone over there, come hang out with us on YouTube, guys. This is where we're answering the majority of the questions. Single entry GPP, Akins and Beckham or Gaskin and Brandon Cooks? Akins and Beckham, lot more leverage, Andrew. So I would say if the rest of your lineup is very chalky, I would go that direction. Optimal for sure, Gaskin and Cooks. So if like the rest of your lineup is like pretty contrarian, I think you can go Gaskin and Cooks there. That's how I would do it. What should I do about Tyreek Hill? Such a terrible situation, man. I feel for all these people that have to make these decisions today. Playing it safe with Robbie Anderson and AJ Green. I think that game is going to get played, right? So it depends on what like your league is doing with that situation. I think they're going to play that game though. So I think you're probably okay to stick back with that. Ben was 70% Drake last week. Man, I'm sorry if I had any impact on that decision. I had a lot of Drake as well, if it makes you feel better. Lockett, the best cash wide receiver, or too expensive? I think the cash is always a situation of what's your roster construction like. I would prefer to pay up at running back, usually. Yeah. Lockett's really not a cash game guy for me ever. What do I think about Mike Davis, Joseph? We love Mike Davis. We talked about him a bunch. Yep. Thoughts on Josh Allen? Cameron, I think Josh Allen is one of the best tournament plays on the board. FanDuel cash, Davis or Henderson? I think it's still it's closer on FanDuel for sure. Maybe Henderson on FanDuel. Let's make that money. Attaboy, Justin. Thanks for being with us, guys. Running out Trotman, Lions D. Love that lineup. Trotman's gonna be, if Trotman makes or break your week here, it's just gonna be a tough scene. Make sure you guys join us on the Tilt Space later, 6:30 p.m. Eastern time on the Live Movement channel. Yancey came over from Twitch. Love it, man. What player am I avoiding today? That's a great question, Josh. That's a great way to, I think, wrap this up. So one guy that I'm avoiding that I think is going to be at least relatively highly owned, I think it's Ronald Jones at 4,700. Yeah, I think that one really struggled. I struggle making that play, and maybe that's just my biases with Tampa Bay and that revolving door at running back. I think if I miss the Ronald Jones 7-catch experience again, like I did last year, I think I'm fine with it. All right, guys, I'm going to go make sure everything is getting settled with our guest today that we have on the Line Movement NFL show. So make sure and join us over there. I will drop the link in the chat one last time. Consider subscribing to the channel if you thought this was a useful conversation today. Let's try and get to 300 likes. That would be amazing. We're at over 500 people here still. Bunch of people over on Twitch also. So appreciate you guys. That link I just dropped in the chat, that's where I will be in about 14 minutes. With our special guest. If you do come over and watch kind of the rest of our program for the day, make sure you jump in that chat and say, "We are back." That's how I'll know you came over from the show. All right, guys, talk to you soon.